Welcome to the third season of the Ashlars podcast. We are thrilled about our progress and, more importantly, grateful for your support and encouragement. We are going in strong with ever more energy and passion into the third season of our humble little initiative. That is, to show the true light of Freemasonry by being India's first and only podcast on Freemasonry. In this season, we continue to highlight papers by Indian Masons and showcase the wealth of Masonic knowledge and wisdom in India. Additionally, we will also shine some light on various other degrees beyond the craft, with a view to help Masons discover the true joy of being a Mason and expand their horizons. As a disclaimer, the thoughts and opinions expressed here are solely of the participants and do not represent any official positions, including those of any Grand Lords or constituents thereof. Best efforts have been made to keep the conversation on the level for brethren and non-Masons alike.
So Shishir, I think when I was actually reading about this overall, what are the central teachings, right? I came across some really good points. One of them, or rather the summary of it is faith and obedience. See, Noah's construction of that ark was under a divine instruction, and it's a testament of his faith and trust in that higher power. Now, obviously, for the time, it doesn't look like, oh, something is going to happen, as you mentioned, right? It looks like a crazy fellow is trying to build a boat in the middle of nowhere where there is not even a sea body nearby. But yeah. Second, salvation and renewal. The ark actually represents a vessel of safety and the opportunity for a fresh beginning. It symbolizes a moral regeneration. That, okay, it's time to reset, let's start something in. And the most important and the interesting part is harmony with nature. Okay, now that there is a covenant which God actually gives human beings. He represents it by the rainbow. Very interesting, right? We first of all are in a Pride month, and we are talking about all of these aspects. This is beautiful because somehow it is, I would say, providence for us. I would say everything coming back together at the same place in the month of June, when this degree gets his happy birthday, as you mentioned, or at least his birth certificate, which was handed over from one parent to another, I would say. But it is that month. Second, obviously, rainbow being the covenant which God actually had with human beings. And interestingly, just for everybody, search for an RAM degree apron and you will know what we are talking about. That same rainbow is actually part of our apron as well, which reminds us, even when we are wearing that apron, it is that symbol. That symbol actually tells us that covenant which God has with us. Then I think there are some other motives which are there. There is obviously ark is available. There is dove. There is rainbow, which I was saying. These motives literally reflects, or rather tells the candidate that this degree will ensure that the trials and tribulations which you are going through in your life, if you have faith, let it be faith in the system, let it be faith in your family, let it be faith in anything else, keep that faith. Because that faith is not something which is just randomly thrown across. That faith stands on a very solid ground. When I have faith that on my family, right, that is not because, oh, they are just my family, it's written somewhere in a paper or something. No. It is based on so many years of living with them, experience and understanding what they are. And that is exactly where that faith comes and stands. I'm not talking about a blind faith. The blind faith is completely different. This is the faith which we keep on all these things. And that's why that ceremony of elevation, right? It actually highlights that faith, the family relationship, and how we can overcome any disaster by coming together and caring for those who are less fortunate than us. See, people were laughing at him when Noah was building it. Animals were not. He took care of some of the animals. He was able to take care of some of the family members. He took care of all of them. His 3 sons were actually with him on that. And that's how it is. By the way, interestingly, in our RAM degree, the sons are actually playing important role in the degree work also. And that is more for you once when you join.
Yeah. And so, just talking about the different parts of it, we have already shared quite a few interesting points, but are there anything else that we want to share? Yeah,
Yes.
Go for it.
Now, the interesting part is when you look at the Noah story, right? First of all, it doesn't fit into that overall story of what we have been seeing in craft and chapter and mark, we have been always talking about Solomon's temple. Okay, the first temple, which was in Jerusalem, built, then the second temple rebuilding. Mark Masonry also talks about the same temple or the folks actually coming together and working on that place and everything. When I was looking at the history of it, and I found a couple of nice, good articles in some of the websites, right? These are the websites of that RAM degree in that area. So it says, examining the old records of the operative Masons reveal that Noah is not listed as a Mason. And why I'm telling this is because if you go to the Anderson's Constitution, which is where we kind of get a lot of story. In Anderson's Constitution, very conveniently, Reverend Dr. James Anderson, the one who wrote our first book of Constitution, conveniently adds, oh, the Masons from that era, from this era. And I'll come to that one point where it says, he's only mentioned, by the way, Noah's story is only mentioned in any and every of the manuscripts which we follow in Freemasonry, the ones which are actually the building block of Freemasonry. He's mentioned briefly in the Halliwell manuscript, the Regis poem which we talk about. And it is not in the context of Freemasonry, but in the context of his name, his as a global history. That something like this happened, like the way we obviously talk about, oh, this happened somewhere some time back. Uh, it is also said that apparently during the Tower of Babel, again in one of the manuscripts, it has been speaking about Noah's flood or Noah's flood. They say instead of Noah's Ark. The Cook manuscript is a bit longer, but it still only talks about the historical story of the flood as part of the biblical element. That's it. Because as I said, they always will use one of the common book which was available in Europe at that time, and the one which many people actually know about, which was the Bible. Then there is a Dolan manuscript which talks about subsequent variations or versions of the legend of the craft, which might have some story of Noah, but merely in the name and that of his sons. That's it. Noah technically does not become part of any Freemasonry as per these old manuscripts. So interestingly, it is, as I said, James Anderson, right? He writes a very interesting line. He says, the old craft legends, at his leisure, I would say, spoke about, labels Noah actually and his three sons as all Masons true in its old English style, and claims that they brought over from the deluge the traditions and arts of the antediluvians and imparted them to the growing descendants. That means the art of metal, like using metal, using fire, using stone, using wood. I think one of the daughters of Noah also knew about embroidery or basically making clothes and everything. All that stories, then they were able to give it to the other folks. Remember, growing descendants and some other folks apparently. Very casually, it is mentioned there. This is the first time when Noah is actually introduced into Masonry. There is one more manuscript, Graham manuscript, and I'll come on to that one. It is in Graham manuscript where some more information is there. But the first of these charges, 1723, when Anderson had given the first constitution, he just casually says a Mason is obliged by his tenure to obey the moral law. But it is in 1738 version, the second version which Anderson writes, he writes without authority saying that you need to be a true Noachida. Why? That means Noah was a true Mason. So obviously, second edition had some more stories which Anderson actually added into it. So that is something which is very interesting. And as I said, the Graham manuscript, I will talk about how that connection from craft and RM actually happens.
So, close on the heels of what you just mentioned, there's also something about the moral law, the Noahide law. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but let me just go through those 7 points.
Yes.
Let me read them verbatim. All right. The yeah. So the Noahide laws are as follows: not to worship idols, not to curse God, not to commit murder, not to commit adultery or sexual immorality, not to steal, not to eat flesh from a living animal, and to establish courts of justice. It's quite fascinating that, like if you look at the 10 commandments, this sort of adds a few more points to it, but like I said, these are all messengers. The basic point is don't be an idiot. Be a good person.
I
Anything you
think
want
there
to
is
add,
one more
Anish?
point. One more point which you can actually think about is if you see the Noah's law, right? Those are moral laws. They are
Yeah.
actually straightforward moral laws. Whereas when we saw the Ten Commandments, they were specific to the Jewish people. Those Ten Commandments are not something which has to be slapped on every other region and place and everything. Nothing of that sort, because it specifically talks about it. Whereas, as you mentioned, do not worship idols, do not curse gods, do not murder, do not commit adultery. These are general stuff which we are talking about. This is supposed to be the right way. This is how we actually is supposed to be. And maybe this could be one of the reasons why when James Anderson actually brought Noah into the into Freemasonry, right? He said a true Mason. That maybe as I said, all Masons true, or he was a true Mason, his sons were a true Mason, maybe because they were actually following those seven laws better than anybody else. Because obviously, as you said, right, the story says people were morally corrupt, so they were actually not following everything correct. So that could be the case.
So, just to add a bit more context, the Ten Commandments, there are certain things like in this case, the first one he says, I am the Lord thy God. But then there are certain things which are still general, like for example, honor thy father and mother, thou shalt not kill.
Yeah,
So, there are some
there are
specifics, but there are
connections.
quite a few generalities as well. So that's why I was
Yes.
saying, these are all points which are essentially messengers, and it just comes down to very basic thing that, be a good person, not just for
True.
your own sake, but for the community's sake as well. I mean, if you're a nuisance to everyone around you, then how can you claim yourself to be a good person? Just to say that I'm doing it for the goodness out of my heart does not fly.
That's true. That's true. That's true.
Yeah. All right. So, considering that we have spoken about a few papers and, how this has evolved, why don't we
Hmm.
talk a little about how the story has changed? So there is
Yes,
this character of Hiram and this character of Noah as well, right?
that's true.
So that
Yes.
over there.
So, as I was saying earlier, there is a manuscript which was somewhere from 1726, Graham manuscript. So, the Graham manuscript actually has a direct mention to Noah and his sons. That's the only manuscript, by the way, which I have found out, at least with a casual search control F of documents which I had. So, it is only in there is an account of a legend surrounding his death. Now, please, all those who have remembered or gone through the craft degree and the craft order itself and the degrees in craft, right? You will understand where I'm going through this. Now, that book contains a series of events that include Masonic specific component which is added into it. Now, according to that scripture, the three sons of Noah, Shem, Japheth, and Ham, in whichever order. I kind of got confused with that. But Shem, Japheth, and Ham, they were searching for the secret that God has actually given to Noah. Now, this article, and if you keep on reading about it, you will come to know what exactly this is. But please do understand this is not the actual story which is there in the Bible. As Shishir mentioned, it is very vague, it is only there. We use that same element to kind of add that oomph factor to it or something like, oh, let's make it like really interesting. Okay. Otherwise, the story is what is available in the Bible itself. So this article, as well as something which I found out, describes that the hunt to locate his grave is something which is important. It should be mentioned also that if the genuine secrets could not be discovered, they decided to incorporate whatever they found. And all those who are here will automatically understand what I'm going to. The story of the sons finding the body of Noah uh, talks about how the discovery happens, how two of them fail, and one is able to actually successfully get the secrets out with whatever is possible. He's like not secrets out, basically finds the body and gets to know, oh, this is it. And that those are the secrets. They said, okay, we do not know what my father knows about it. Might as well, whatever is available, we will consider that as a story. Parallel to it, we have seen the same thing, especially for all those who are members of the orders of craft. You have seen the same thing in the degree work. So that is the one connection which I have realized, which we have seen in craft with what Noah's story, which again, as I said, has been generated, created, and everything. This, please understand, this is somewhere from the 1720s. This is at the same time when that whole story of the third degree also was being developed and attached into the two degree order. So this is the time when somebody said, let's make up a story on all these things. Craft members should be aware that the approach is very similar, right? This is how exactly it used to be there. But there was a change. Now, how did that change from Noah to Hiram? So there is I forgot the name of the paper, and I will definitely add it, hopefully in the show notes itself. Alexander Horn, who was writing a book, oh yeah, there is a book called King Solomon's Temple in the Masonic tradition wise. There is a book, I think I have that book with me. He cites a paper by a person named as George Bullimore that examines a theory that suggests that the earlier church builders obviously used timber. If you see, I think there are many shows. If you see some of the shows which are available on Netflix, there is a very good show on King Athelstan. That show, if you actually see, you will see that old church obviously made out of timber. There was no wood, there was no stone cutters at that time. So the earlier church were used out of used out of timbers, and they continue the traditions of the sons of Noah. Why? Because Noah also built the ark using timber. So they continued that tradition. They built on that same tradition. Then finally, when stone obviously we learned how to cut the stone. The stone cutters established themselves, and they wanted to utilize another building, a building which stood the test of time for some time actually, but still stood the test of bringing people from different regions, coming together and building a temple, the first temple for God in a specific place. And that's when King Solomon's temple became attached. Now that's where craft suddenly moved from timber cutters to stone cutters. So the story from Noah moved on to King Solomon's temple, where it is clearly mentioned King Solomon obviously couldn't have done it on his own. He needed help and strength and builders. So he obviously went to King Hiram of Tyre. King Hiram of Tyre, who was from a completely different area, who did not even pray to the same God which King Solomon was praying, he brought Hiram Abiff, who was a master craftsman who understood what it was, and then Hiram Abiff obviously helped them to design and construct and give the blueprint of the entire building. So that's where that entire discussion moves from this to that. Noah's personality merges with Hiram. Not just a name change, the myth also changes, the story also changes, but the underlying story obviously remains the same. But it also took out some of the elements from there to be here.
It's fascinating, when you think about it, the transition timber to stone, and
Yeah.
in both cases, two things have been created which are legendary by itself, right?
Mm.
Creating an ark out of timber that can house a whole host of animals, not a small
Mm-hmm.
task. Even today in
That's true.
2025, we both are talking about it. People are aware about it, right? And it was so important. It's there in the Bible as well, and the Bible itself has been around for ages.
Yes, yes.
At the same time, King Solomon's temple, yet another legendary, thing. And those in the craft will recall that its splendor and beauty was known across the lands. And it was a
Yes.
magnanimous effort. It took so many years to build, and people behind it were also legendary. Hiram, for example, King Solomon, for example. Same way, Noah as well. So, how the transition from one thing to the other, I think that is what was really captivating for me. Now, considering this whole story that we have been trying to sort of put forward and make it more accessible, I would like to conclude. And Rinesh has put 3 points in a very concise way. I was thinking I'll put it in my words, but I feel it's better if I read it verbatim. All right. So, not to undermine or steal Rinesh's thunder, but I'll read it verbatim. And here is how it goes. The potential for self improvement it gives are connected with the manner in which it transmits its message. The study of Noah's story, the events of the deluge, and the efforts of the survivors allows the student to identify other grounds of thought. It emphasizes obeying the moral rule, our commitments to our Creator, and faith. It also serves as a reminder to Masonic students that the craft's original roots will never be understood. It may also serve as a reminder that when we hear the phrase Masonic history informs us, we should focus less on accuracy and more on the teachings that the ceremonies are intended to convey. Again, comes down to the same point which I've been repeating like a broken record now, and that is these are all messengers, these are all vehicles to convey a message, a teaching which we need to take. That interpretation again is dependent on you as a learner. It might be different from how you interpret it, how I interpret it, but those are just outputs. The outcome is when you and I live in harmony, be better people, and make the society a better place to live in, not just for myself, but for everyone else involved. That is the outcome which all of these things are trying to convey. And then that if you understand, I think our objectives met, Freemasonic objectives are met, and Noah and Hiram were a success.
Yeah,
Rinesh, what do
no,
you say?
I agree with you because I obviously completely agree on that fact that the underlying story, right, which kind of gives us that overall explanation of how to live, how to behave, and how to do it. That is what is there. And for those who are still trying to figure out how does it still connect, I just want to give you one last point. The deacon's wand, at least in most of the English rituals, wherever it is being followed, still has a dove carrying a twig in his beak. Where do you think that came from? Why do you think it is even there? It's a messenger. Where do you think that story comes from? Noah. Why do you think that entire concept of, oh, even if something is going wrong, we need to have that? It is there. These biblical stories, there can be scholars who can keep on debating about it, or the Veda stories, or the Mesopotamian stories, or the Greek stories. You can keep on debating whether it ever happened or didn't happen. But for people who would like to learn and listen those things, oh sorry, listen and then learn from them, it doesn't matter where it happened and whether it happened or not. It is that story and the teachings of the story which is actually more important. And that's why I actually added that specific line that even you hear that story that Masonic history says it is not a history which has been written on stone. People have been changing it. Somebody moved from Noah's story to a Hiram's story. Three people finding something and three people finding something. Oh my goodness, there's a lot of stuff which is actually happening. So concentrate on the message and not just on the messenger and the overall picture.
Perfectly put. Um, so I think with that, we come to an end to an interesting order. It's been fascinating, I would say. And
It's nice. Somebody used to call this actually a very happy order, because
yeah,
there are
yeah.
two things for that. First of all, when you go into the meeting, I'm pretty sure you and I have always witnessed it. Assuming there is a candidate for elevation, right? We go in at 6:30 and we actually come out by 7:45.
I know
So
it's
the
a
first
pretty short
half an
order.
hour is only our business discussions, which is happening about what circular, what payment, what and all that stuff. And assuming we start exactly at 7, we still be out at 7:45. That's why somebody
Correct.
used to tell me, "Rinesh, this is a happy order. I like this because I do not get delayed by anything." I'm like, wow, that's
Yeah.
a completely new intake to it, but good.
I just remembered one thing when you mentioned about the deacon's wand, right?
Hmm.
So those of you who are in the craft, just the first degree opening, focus on the deacons, what they reply. I
Hmm,
think
hmm,
you'll
hmm.
sort of understand what Rinesh just mentioned. What did the doves do? The
What is
doves,
it?
were going out there and basically passing on a message. What was the message? Basically, Noah wanted to know, is there land or not? And the doves did that. And who owns the land? It is the Lord, right? So I'll just leave it there.
Awesome.
So another one way to sort of dig into masonry, right? So the more you dig, the more you know.
Yes.
All right, folks. So it's been a good one. Hope you enjoyed listening to this, and we'll come back with more. Until then, keep sending in your feedback, any appreciations, any criticisms. We are all ears, and that is what will make us better, right? If we don't get feedback, we don't get criticism, we don't get encouragement, then we'll always think that either we are not doing a good job or we are doing a very good job. But that is delusion until someone shows us the mirror. So please show us the mirror, and then we'll know where we want to improve. So with that,
Yes.
folks, have a good one. Take care and bye
Th-
bye.
Thank you.
That's all, folks. We sincerely hope that you liked our episode and got a glimpse into the fascinating world of Freemasonry. If you have any queries about what we have shared on the podcast or about Freemasonry in general, please check out the show notes for links to the Grand Lodge of India's website or write us an email, which is theashlurspodcast@gmail.com.